got the idea to do Be Thankful as a record. I had been playing it for years in clubs. People always dance to it. It's an extremely simple record. It's 2 minor chords. William DeVaughn wrote an amazingly simple, excellent piece of music, a piece of R&B music. I always admired how much he got out of such a simple harmonic environment. I was down in Jamaica with a buzz late at night listening to a weather report, and in typical Jamaican fashion they had echo machines on the weather forecaster and giant ambient sounds, and the weather report itself was kind of like an art piece. And it just got my mind going, and I thought, wouldn't it be cool to take a fusion bass line, a really aggressive, what we would call busy bass line from jazz fusion, and put that onto a dance piece. And Be Thankful was the one that popped into my head. And I started thinking about the vibe parts and the marimba parts and the way I would produce it. And came back to New York and booked the time at Unique Recording on 48th Street in Times Square, and booked the time, brought my electric vibes and marimbas in and cut the track. I played all the parts. I used a Pro 1 and a Dr. Rhythm, and it was really fun because it was really a mallet-heavy production, probably 10 tracks of mallet work with bass synth and some strings. I probably did the strings with an Oberheim OBSX and Dr. Rhythm, and that pretty much makes the whole piece. We mixed it through a bunch of effects units, of course, and Norma Garbo did background vocals. But that's the genesis of the idea. Recording Just Be Thankful was really fun because I was pretty much alone in the studio. I just did everything I felt like doing. I had a really early generation synthesizer that was called monophonic. It only played one note, and I ran that with a sequence, triggering it with a Dr. Rhythm. And basically I just laid down a really simple basic track. There was really no sequencing at that point, in I guess 1981, 82. So I laid down the track and I hand played the changes to the tune, but it was sequencing the bass line. So once I got the basic down, then I just went in with a set of marimbas and played probably 8 or 10 overdubs with chords and textures, and a bunch of overdubs with the electric vibraphone. That instrument, which I'd been playing since I was a teenager, I wanted to replicate Jimi Hendrix, so I learned how to bend notes and get distortion. The electric vibraphone went through a bunch of different boxes. And basically I went in, laid down the track, built up the textures with mallet instruments, and started to turn it into a groove, a feel. And at that point, laid down vocals, brought in Norma Garbo, a background singer, and she added a little bit of background vocal, and then we spent some time mixing it. It was pretty easy as far as tracking it goes because I was the only musician on the production. Recording back in the day was a little bit like going to the hospital. It was very serious. The control room, the recording environment, the equipment. You were very much told what to do by the engineers, and you kind of went to, as musicians, to kind of be examined. There was this definite technical feeling that, of course, you didn't understand what everything was for. Your job was just to play your music. And in the old days, before me, a band would just show up and play live, and the engineers would do their engineer thing. It all started to merge with synthesizers. Suddenly, musicians started hanging out in the control rooms because their synths were plugged in directly. And little by little, especially when the engineer was taking a leak or having a cigarette, we'd start playing with the controls ourselves. Cutting the vocal on Be Thankful for What You Got was pretty easy because I don't have a lot of range. So I knew it'd have to be 1 or 2 takes at the most. I'd been singing the tune in nightclubs for years, so I was comfortable with it, but I knew I couldn't sing it like William B. DeVaughn. So I just did my own version. Norma Garbo sang the backups, and that went pretty quick. We laid it up on top of the track and didn't play with it too much. Little by little over the years in music, I started flying airplanes and started getting really involved in aviation. That led to photography. I was doing photography for some of my record albums, doing music videos, and started a whole new career shooting stock footage and footage clips for film and TV movies and films.
So I'm still doing that. I'm still flying airplanes. I'm still doing music, but it's really been it's been great having Be Thankful come back out into the world.
The studio in New York City in Times Square was unique recording, Bobby Nathan's place. It was where we made a lot of dance records. It was a really easygoing studio with parrots in the entrance and a pretty loose atmosphere inside, but it had good equipment. And it was an easy place to cut tracks and mix. So always just take the subway right to Times Square and get to work. Well, it was really early generation. The Electric Vibes is the most unusual piece of equipment. I bought it when probably back in the mid-70s. The vibraphone was going electric like all instruments, and I was trying to replicate Jimi Hendrix on the vibraphone. A musician named Dan Hartman heard what I was doing in a club, and he put me on a record called Relight My Fire, Vertigo Relight My Fire, and all the solos and leads were done by me on the Electric Vibes, and that really exposed the instrument a lot, but unfortunately on a recording, most people thought when they heard that instrument they were listening to a synthesizer or a guitar. So it didn't really translate on tape as well as I was hoping because it didn't sound unique enough. But that was the instrument I played, so that's what I used on Thankful. So all the lead parts and all the electric distortion parts were done by the vibraphone. Other equipment included a Pro One, which was a very early generation monophonic synthesizer. That was all the bass parts. And as the bass was sequencing, I would turn the filter up and down to give it a little bit of edge sometimes and change chords. And then the Dr. Rhythm was a really, really basic drum machine. I think it had built-in drum patterns that you could manipulate a little bit, but you basically were stuck with one drum pattern. And that plugged into the Pro One, and that's how I coordinated. Anyway, that's how the bottom track was pretty much Pro One and Dr. Rhythm. And after that, everything else was played live. I went in and I cut it actually pretty fast. I think I cut the whole thing in a couple of nights, did the vocal. And then Corey Robbins, this head of Profile Records, he wanted to send it through a bunch of different mixers. First we used Jonathan Faring, who I'd done a lot of work with for WBLS in New York City. And we spent a couple of long nights. I forgot the studio tracking and remixing. Corey didn't like that, and even though it had been a long, expensive process, he then went with a guy named Eric Matthew, who had a couple of hit records, and added cowbell all over the track, and that was ultimately what was used on the record that Profile released. I liked his mix. I didn't like all of the edits, and I wasn't crazy about the cowbell the whole time. So I had questions, but I was pretty young, and a record label was producing it. Putting it out. So I was happy for that. You know, it was an early sequencer song. The big deal in a way was that nobody had used sequencers very much at that point. And I was trying to stick fusion music into dance music. I was really a jazz musician that played vibes, and I wanted to figure out a way to insidiously put in some of the fusion lines that we played in performances into a dance product, hopefully a more commercial product that I could make a living with. So ultimately, Eric Matthews' mix is the one that hit the streets, and that was the first Be Thankful mix. The mixes on the record that Pittsburgh Track Authority are putting out, those are my mixes. Those are my original studio mixes that I did at Unique Recording. So that was certainly my intention for what I thought the record should sound like. I was probably a little bit more jazzy than the one Profile put out. I wanted it to be a little bit of a fusion feeling and a dance feeling. I wanted the textures, especially the marimbas and the vibes, to be dominant. There really wasn't many dance records I'm aware of that use mallet instruments in general, and I thought that was kind of a fun idea to just have a mallet instrument, drums and bass dance record. we had very strong feelings about whether something was so-called real by being done in the studio or was a demo. The difference between demo and production was dramatic. Nowadays, what I hear a lot of music sound like, of course, wouldn't even have been considered demo stage. You know, when you hear bass drum tracks, or you know, you hear a lot of loosely EQ'd tracks. You know, in the old days, we would have been afraid to even play that for somebody.